So, ladies and gentlemen, the debate is finally out. The debate between Alex O'Connor and David Wood, who I popularly call Dry Wood. Of course, I've made videos for the reasons I call him Dry Wood. And of course, you would also see the reasons in this video. The debate is out finally. I don't really know why they held the debate to themselves before finally releasing the debate. But it is interesting that one of the first people to actually condemn Dry Wood for a very bad and poor performance is Shamoun, the one I always call Scared Shamoun. He pointed out why Drywood really underperformed, given the title of the debate, if Jesus claimed to be God or not. But before we watch the video, I would also want us to look at what Christians have to say. Christians that actually watched the debate, not those that predict what's going to happen in the debate by giving victory to David Wood even before the debate itself. So we're going to be reading some few comments from those that actually watched the debate, Christians to be specific, that actually watched the debate. So before going to that, let's not forget to like and share this video, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. I always say that we hope to get 200,000 subscribers before the end of the year. It's still a long way to go, but I believe we can make it happen. So let's make it happen. So please subscribe to the channel, and if you can support the channel, please do. Links will be in the comments and also the description. So first and foremost, we'll be going into what the Christians have to say, the Christians that actually watched the debate, before watching what Shamoun said regarding the performance of Dry Wood. Let's get started. This one said, this debate was painful to watch, especially from David's position. He was stumbling for the whole time right after Alex made his opening. This one said, holy, I am Christian, but David Wood's straw mans are making me reconsider. Is he dull or just maliciously misrepresent? He could be a politician, This one called Christian, he said, I have listened to dozens, if not scores of debates on various subjects in relation to Christian theology, and I think Alex's rebuttal period is one of the very strongest portions of any debate I've heard. He quickly and carefully dismantles every single point David made in his opening, as well as the rebuttal with great precision and entirely on the basis of the scriptures David claims to believe. This one said, I'm a follower of Jesus, but David Wood seems like a charlatan. He will triumphantly say Alex's interpretation of Philippians just doesn't work, and then do a rapid-fire contentious rehash of the same reading that Alex rejected for clear reasons. That's just an example. But in general, David Wood exhibits the central failings of the Christian apologetics industry. Infinite confidence while making 10 contentious claims in a row. Sad stuff. Would be far more interesting to see Alex in a normal conversation with someone serious like N.T. Wright. This one said, David Wood was just like every other right-wing Christian apologist, attacks their opponent instead of making salient argument. This guy is talking about the opening speech of David Wood, where he referring to Alex O'Connor as the villain, and then he continued and falls back on presuppositions and dogmas instead of coherent data. This one said, hi Alex, congratulations for the debate, congratulating Alex for, the victory. Shamoun said in a few lives that he would be pleased to debate you on the same topic, even on your channel if you prefer. This guy, haven't seen that David Wood underperformed and was, cooked. He's suggesting that Alex O'Connor debates Shamoun. This one also says, Alex debates Shamoun, please, as you can see them begging Alex to debate Shamoun. It's pretty much obvious at this point that David lost to Alex O'Connor. You can watch the debate if you doubt what I'm saying. So now going back to what Shamoun himself said, let's enjoy.
Be the bad guy, I'll be the bad guy. I'll be the Tony Montana of apologetics. Because you see how the clique mentality, right, is damaging Christianity. You call out David Wood for now making Alex a superstar because he embarrassed himself, claiming I was too tired and sleepy and groggy. That's your excuse when you're going to glorify the Lord Jesus Christ by taking down one of the most influential atheist YouTubers. That's your excuse, and you think it's not serious and you take it as a joke. But because David Wood will surround himself with people who won't call him out because they don't want to then be ostracized by him and have him cut them off. The hell with that, man. It's not about your reputation. It's about the glory of the Lord Jesus Christ. You let Alex steamroll you on the Gospel of John, and now he's going to be a superstar. Because rustling my feathers, the clout chaser wants subscribers, wants views, and wants money.
Oh my God! So now we'll be going on to the clips I found pretty much interesting. 6 minutes rebuttal. In fact, the whole debate is pretty much interesting. I would advise you guys to watch the whole debate. But these 6 minute rebuttal, I found it interesting that I wanted to share this portion with you guys, and also the portion that has to do with the open dialogue where they had one-on-one conversation. So let's enjoy.
6-minute rebuttal, and then that'll be followed up by Alex's 6-minute rebuttal.
All right, Alex says we're looking for the best explanation. I would submit that the best explanation for Jesus claiming to be one of the two powers in heaven, and for claiming to do things like judge the world and raise the dead at the resurrection, and for why his followers are praying to him and worshiping him and calling him God and the Son of God, and doing the same thing, doing the exact same thing that Jesus does, namely claiming to be one of the two powers in heaven, and for his enemies to repeatedly accuse him of blasphemy, ultimately sentence him to death, and then people who say the same thing, like Stephen, also find themselves being executed. I would say that the best explanation of that is Jesus was claiming to be God. That's just me. It's like if I met like five, suppose I never heard a word from Alex, but I meet like 5 of his biggest fans, and they say, yeah, we love Alex, he's the Messiah. And then I run into 5 of his harshest critics, and they say, man, we can't stand that dude Alex, he thinks he's the Messiah. Even if I never heard a word from Alex, I'd be thinking he was claiming to be something like that, and that's what's giving his friends and enemies that indication. Likewise with Jesus, even if I didn't have any words of Jesus, if I just knew these guys people were being put to death for making these kinds of claims, and that his followers are going around worshiping him and praying to him, I would think he's saying something. Now, Alex apparently thinks that the best explanation is this divine name-bearing scenario. If so, Jesus did a really terrible job of getting that message across, and it doesn't seem like anyone really got the point unless we do some creative interpretations of some passages. Alex again quotes Exodus to say that the angel of the Lord is just some representative who bears the name. Again, I quoted the exact same book he quoted where Yahweh says that I'm not going along with you anymore, which is Yahweh saying that he was the angel of the Lord who was guiding them. He says that his view is that Jesus is presented as the ideal servant of God. The ideal servant of God convinces people to bow down and worship him and pray to him and so on. This is what the ideal servant of God would do. That's a very strange ideal servant of God, since that's kind of precisely what you shouldn't do if you're not God. He says that proskuneo can mean bow down. Yes, the word proskuneo depends on the context. If it's a religious context, it refers to worship. Someone can just bow down to you out of respect, and that would be, you can bow down to a normal human. But guess what? We have clearly religious context in some of these passages. For instance, Matthew 14:33, they are freaked out. Those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. That's a different sort of context than I want to ask you for a favor and I want to bow down out of respect. As for Philippians 2, it sounded like he was saying, Dunn's theory, that this is just saying that when it says who was in very nature God, it's actually the form of God. But this is just saying that he was a human being, and since he found himself as a human being, like we're all the image of God, he humbled himself, and therefore he was eventually exalted, and so on. It just doesn't work. Let me just read it. Who being in very nature God, or you can just make up a translation, say image of God for fun. Who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Yes, that can mean seeds. It can also mean used to his advantage. You look at what makes sense in context. Did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. The decision to humble himself is what led to him being made in human likeness. This isn't a human being who's sitting around going, hey, I'm in the image of God. I could strive to be like God, like Adam did, but I'm going to humble myself instead. This is a divine being humbling himself by becoming a human being. And then, being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him in the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Alex seems to think that if you're a human being and you humble yourself in this way, that God can just exalt you to the status of Yahweh and apply these passages that are just Yahweh, when Yahweh says there's no one else but me. That's what's being quoted there from Isaiah. As for kurios, Alex says, well, what would they be using? They would be using the Septuagint, the Greek translation. Yeah, and they went to a passage, they used the formulation kurios, which is specifically referring to Yahweh. That's what Jesus uses. He's quoting kurios. He's calling himself kurios. The only other use of that is the Septuagint, where it refers to Adonai Yahweh. So why is Jesus using that? And again, I only brought up that point because he brought up the point about the Septuagint and using it to interpret the claims of Christ. So I said, fine, let's go with it. We got in Luke, and therefore that's him claiming to be Yahweh. Was Jesus a bad communicator? He says, but Jesus wasn't clear, and he veiled his statements. So yes, I grant all of that. Jesus was a careful communicator. He was careful about how he communicated certain things. He tried to unveil certain things over time when people were ready for it. That's not what I consider a bad communicator. I consider all of that part of being a very good communicator. If you're saying that the people who all heard Jesus all got it wrong somehow, or that we don't really have the records of the people who somehow got it right, that his friends got it wrong because they continue and they build their church around him, and his enemies are sentencing him to death, I would say that's a really, really, really bad communicator, and that just does not line up. If everyone is concluding the same thing about this guy, that he's claiming to be God, that he's claiming to be one of the two powers in heaven, the best explanation is not some idea that no one got. The best explanation is very simple. He was making those claims. That's why we have all this evidence.
All right. All right. Check. Okay, so now Alex is going to do his second 6-minute rebuttal.
Okay, I suppose I really want to nail down on this worship point, since I was kind of getting at that at the end. And David says, yeah, proskuneo can mean just simply bowing down, but in a religious context, it means something else. Like, what do you mean? How do you know that without begging the question? Like I say, let's actually evaluate. That's what I was sort of going through, how many times proskuneo worship is given to Jesus in the New Testament. Or at least that Jesus accepted in the New Testament. It doesn't happen once in Luke's Gospel. It basically doesn't happen once in Mark, because it happens twice, and one of these is a demon, and one of these, which I suppose is an interesting thing to explore in itself, but one of these is them simply mocking Jesus because he's the king. Why would they consider mocking him with proskuneo worship if he was claiming to be king of the Jews? Because that's what proskuneo means. If proskuneo can mean actually worship of the kind that Latruo usually gets at, that is worship, cultic worship of a religious figure, as David suggests, here's a riddle for you. Why isn't it given to Jesus after Jesus ascends? Why isn't it that people are offering proskuneo worship after Jesus ascends, except at the moment of his ascension at the end of Luke's Gospel, which, as I say, is contested in our manuscript tradition anyway? Why not? Because it refers to a physical action. Because it's not referring to worship of the kind that David wants it to be in this context. In John's Gospel, which we didn't get to, how many times does Jesus accept worship? The answer again is once. Just once it happens, in John chapter 9. This is the man who was born blind, who I mentioned earlier. In verse 38, he says to Jesus, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. Except he doesn't say so in Papyrus 75, he doesn't say so in Codex Sinaiticus, he doesn't say so in Codex Washingtonianus. In other words, this verse isn't present in our earliest manuscripts. We're pretty confident that there are elements of the Gospels which are later interpolations, most famously the ending of Mark's Gospel, which is not in our earliest manuscripts, and the story of the adulterous woman, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, which are not in our early manuscripts. I'm interested as to whether David thinks that there are things in the Gospels which didn't actually happen, either because they're recorded incorrectly or because they are later interpolations. But at least in this case of worship, it seems to be a later interpolation. But at best, we've got one instance of Jesus accepting worship in John's Gospel, and our manuscript evidence seems to suggest that there's none. If worshipping Jesus is supposed to be some indication of his divinity, then why is it only Matthew's Gospel who seems to mention anything to do with worship, and uses a term when there's another one available to indicate cultic religious worship to someone who's divine? Yet he chooses a word which just means physical prostration before someone who has a higher authority, like, I don't know, maybe the Messiah. Like, the disciples bow down and worship Jesus. At what point do you think they began to get the picture that he was God? They knew that he was the Messiah for a long time, but I genuinely don't know when David thinks they began to realize that this person was God. Do you think there might be an instance of them offering proskuneo worship to Jesus before they'd fully realized that? I think so, because proskuneo worship is a physical action that's given to people who are of a higher authority. Just to belabor this point, in the Septuagint, here are some examples of proskuneo worship. Lot worships 2 angels in Genesis. Abraham worships the Hittites. Isaac blesses Jacob to have all the nations on earth worship him in Genesis. Jacob worships Esau. Joseph's brothers worship him. Abigail worships David's servants in 1 Samuel. Saul worships the dead Samuel in 1 Samuel. The sons of prophets worship Elijah in 2 Kings. David worships the temple in Psalm 5. All the people of Israel worship King David in 1 Chronicles. This is the same term, proskuneo. If David wants to suggest that sometimes this proskuneo worship can mean cultic religious worship, even though there's another word available that people use to mean that, but it's not being used in this instance for some reason, I want to know what that distinction is, and how we can know which kind of worship is being given, without simply begging the question and saying that, well, when it's given to Jesus, it's obviously of the religious kind. Otherwise, as far as I'm concerned, this worship point is essentially bunk. Some of you might be thinking, hold on a second, in the temptation in the desert, Satan asks Jesus to worship him. And what does Satan say? Do you know? He says, worship, it is written, worship God and serve him only. So you're only supposed to worship God. And people say that this is an indication that any worship of anybody other than God would be immoral. That interpretation cannot be the case. Firstly, because it would condemn all of the people that I've just listed to be sinners, including the entire assembly of Israel. That can't be it. Let's look again at this passage. Jesus is quoting a passage which, by the way, he's actually changed. In the Old Testament, the passage that he's quoting says, fear God, rather than worship God. But besides the point, the word only here qualifies not the word worship, but the word serve. Worship God and serve him only. Worship here is proskuneo, which we know that Jesus can't be saying only proskuneo towards God, because all of these people, including people that Jesus talks about himself, are offered proskuneo worship. Indeed, proskuneo is worshipped, is promised to all of you in Revelation. So we know that he can't mean only worship God in that sense, but only qualifies the word serve. Worship God and serve him only. What is the word serve? Which Greek word is translated in this passage to serve? Does anybody know? Latruo, cultic religious worship. So this is a reaffirmation of the point that proskuneo worship is fine. But latruo worship is something special that can only be given to God. The key text here is James Dunn's, Did the Early Christians Worship God? And as he rightly points out, there is no talk anywhere once in the entire New Testament of latruo worship being offered to Jesus. Why not?
All right. Okay, so that concludes Alex's second rebuttal round. We're going to move to open discussion. All right, all right, all right. Well, shall we spark it off, gentlemen?
Whatever you like.
Let's do it. Open dialogue. Who would like to take the lead?
Well, I have some questions, perhaps, to ask David about his position on Jesus' relationship to the Father, with particular regards to the authority that he derives from the Father. So, one question, for example. Why do you think that Jesus prays before raising Lazarus from the dead?
The Old Testament says that God is the God of all flesh. If a divine being were to become incarnate, as is claimed of Jesus, and that divine being really became a flesh and blood human being like Jesus, then if he's also had an eternal relationship with the Father, then I don't know if I'd expect him to be an atheist when he entered into creation. So in other words, if the Christian picture is correct, we've got Father and Son for all eternity. Son enters into creation. What's he going to be, an atheist? If he is going to, as part of it, is if he's going to be the ideal human or something like that.
Yeah.
And so
the Son of Man, one might say.
As far as what Jesus is going to do, you would continue the eternal relationship that you've had with the Father, and you would do that through prayer. So,
what I mean to say is, could Jesus have risen Lazarus from the dead of his own accord, on his own authority?
I suppose, yeah.
I suppose.
Because all authority has been given to him.
It's been given to him by God, right? Which the way that I read that is that the Father has delegated the authority that is rightfully his to Jesus. And it's often said to me that Jesus raising people from the dead of his own authority is actually an indication of his divinity, because we have Old Testament passages of people raising people from the dead, like Elijah and Elisha, and the point is always made that, well, they pray before they rise from the dead. Jesus doesn't pray. But before he raises Lazarus, in John chapter 11, he looks upward and says, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I've said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so they may believe that you have sent me. And when he says this, he cries out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. So Jesus is not only praying before raising Lazarus, but also saying that I always do this. It's just I'm doing it right now publicly, so there's no confusion that you're the one who sent me to do this. And so even in instances where Jesus appears to perform miracles of his own accord, such as calming the storm, or indeed raising other people from the dead, like the widow's child, he tells us here in John's Gospel that he always is in communication with God beforehand, but right now he's saying so publicly, so that people will know that he sent him. Why does Jesus need to pray before he raises Lazarus from the dead?
I mean, this is the exact same chapter where Jesus declares himself the resurrection and the life.
That's right.
And it's in the same book where Jesus says that he's the one who raises the dead at the resurrection. Everyone who's in their graves will hear the voice of the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
so if you're thinking that when we talk about Jesus, we're thinking of him as some rogue deity who does things on his own, I mean, that's basically the entire meaning of John chapter 5. John chapter 5 is basically one response to this. Jesus heals on the Sabbath. And this freaks him out because they say, hey, what are you doing? He says, well, the Father's working until now, I'm working too.
Yeah.
And so since the Father's working, I get to work. You all don't get to work, I get to work. And then they accuse him of claiming to be equal to God. And then he explains it. That it's a verse that Muslims use. They say, he says, by my own self, I can do nothing. But if you look at what he's saying, it's, I can do nothing separately from the Father. But that's the same chapter where he claims that he's the final judge, where he claims that he's the one who raises the dead at the resurrection. And he explains it and says, for the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son, just as they honor the Father. Mm-hmm. The only way you honor the Son the same way you honor the Father is if they have the same nature and attributes. You wouldn't honor anyone else like you honor God.
Interesting. Do you believe
so Jesus is saying that the reason he's the one who judges everything is so that we honor him the same way we honor the Father.
I'm noticing the words granted and given or authority there. This idea that Jesus raises the dead is not exactly clear in John chapter 5. Like if we look at the words that we're actually dealing with here, the Father judges no one but has entrusted all judgment to the Son. presumably the Father could judge if he wanted to. He's made a decision to entrust this to the Son, meaning that the Son doesn't have this power necessarily. If the Son has this power necessarily, it's not something that needs to be entrusted to him in the way that the Father then would not have it. He then says, very truly, I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who has sent me has eternal life. And goes on to say that the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live.
Hear the voice of the Son of God.
Yeah. Now,
he's the Son of God, right? Jesus?
That's right.
You're agreeing that he's claiming to be the Son of God.
Yeah, so they'll hear his voice and they'll be raised from the dead. But how do we, like, who is doing the raising here? And how do you know?
Let's have it. Let's have it.
Wait, you're saying we're going to hear, people are going to, you're saying someone else is raising them
God.
when they hear the voice of the Son of God. So
That's
they're
right.
dead. They're just bones. They hear the voice of the Son of God, and then someone else raises them.
For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to also have life in himself.
Life in himself.
Yes, any power that Jesus has here is given to him by the Father. Why is Jesus, if God, in need of being given this power by the Father?
You have this is the exact same issue that you have in Daniel 7, where the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven approaches the Ancient of Days, and he is given authority, glory, and sovereign power. So why is he being given authority and glory and sovereign power?
Yeah.
But even before that, it's the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven.
Yeah.
That's how he approaches. But it's Yahweh who comes with the clouds. So he's Yahweh, and then something happens, and then he's given...
The Son of Man is Yahweh. Do you think that that was how Daniel 7 was interpreted by anybody before? Because we started with this idea of the Son of Man coming on the clouds, meaning that he's Yahweh. Do you think that's how Daniel interpreted his vision? Do you think that's
I believe
how
Daniel saw a vision and recorded his vision.
Do you think that's how the Sanhedrin interpreted Daniel 7? When Jesus comes for his trial, and he says, and he quotes Daniel 7, and says that you'll see the Son of Man riding on the clouds of heaven, do you think that the problem there was that Jesus was claiming to be God, and that's something that no human being can do? Because Daniel 7 is part of the Jewish scripture. They were expecting the coming of this Son of Man. So if it's obvious that the Son of Man was going to be Yahweh, then the Sanhedrin should have expected that the coming Son of Man would have been Yahweh. They might have thought that Jesus wasn't him. But do you think that the Sanhedrin were expecting whoever the rightful Son of Man was, who was to come, would be identical to Yahweh? And if not, why did they not read that into the passage as obviously as you think that they should have done?
People were basically confused by these passages. That's the impression you get. They go in all sorts of different directions, and, oh, this is referring to the Messiah. No, this is referring to some sort of angel. No, this is referring to this. No, that's... I'm talking about what the text says. The Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven. All before that, it's always Yahweh who comes on the clouds. And so if you were looking at that and you didn't, if you didn't have the idea of, wait a minute, it just can't be. It's impossible that is referring to God, because you've got the Ancient of Days right there. If you're not reading, I mean, and really, I don't even know what to do if you're saying that. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about anyone.
Yeah.
If you're reading that and going, no, it doesn't seem like this is God. He comes with the clouds of heaven, but then he's worshipped by all nations and has an everlasting kingdom. If you're just reading that, if put it this way, if you didn't have the Ancient of Days in the picture and you're reading this description, comes in the cloud of heavens, worshipped by all nations, they obviously God.
Yeah, so
the mystery comes in. The mystery comes in when it's, wait a minute, we've got the Ancient of Days here, so this is sounding like two divine beings, and we just can't have that.
Real quick, so we've gone through about 20 minutes. David, are you comfortable staying here, or do you want to ask Alex some questions now?
No,
keep going on this open
hoping to nail it down,
sure.
because the point...
So on this part that has to do with the open dialogue, as you can see, Ruslan was trying to help David Wood, because Alex O'Connor was pretty much pressing on David Wood, and David was looking like, the person he is, an ignoramus, just jumping here and there all over the places. And then Ruslan was trying to, it's time for you, David, to be the one pressing Alex, be the one asking questions. And that's why he stopped it and said, David, is he okay with this position, being pressed and not vice versa, him pressing Alex with questions? But David Wood, after being cooked, he wasn't, pretty much interested in that. And then Alex O'Connor continued to press this guy until Ruslan couldn't take it anymore, and he had to cut the whole thing short and said, it's time up, and we'll have to take in question and answers.
So you can do the same thing. Why are they why are they interpreting that as
exactly?
Why aren't they interpreting that as he's just saying that Jesus is the Messiah?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay,
why did they think that?
We got to move to Q&A. We've gone way over the open dialogue.
Apologies,
so if you have a question, line up over there while I let you guys finish your thoughts. Guys, hey, oh gosh.
Moving forward, the closing remarks of Alex O'Connor is pretty much interesting, so I would advise you to watch the debate yourself and learn one or two things. And if you're a Christian, please watch the debate with an open heart, okay? That would make you listen and then absorb the truth to yourself, and would of course make you to do more research on who Jesus really claimed to be. We see in various passages of the Bible where Jesus claimed to be the Messiah, but did he actually claim to be God, equal with the Father? This is something we need to ask ourselves. So I remain your brother Abdul. Catch you in the next one.
I want to know why Jesus is given the authority to forgive sins, which at least is interpreted by his Jewish opponents as something only God can do, and then gives it to his disciples, the same authority at the end of John chapter 20, saying, as the Father has sent me, I'm now sending you. What is going on here? Why is Jesus passing on all of these divine prerogatives in unity to his disciples in precisely the way that he got them from the Father? If any of these instances, any of these divine... And same thing with judgment, by the way, which David keeps coming back to, which God also delegates to other people. Again, we haven't heard much response on these ideas of it's not just Jesus who gets to judge, but Jesus also delegates that judgment. The example I gave was delegating judgment of the 12 tribes of Israel to his disciples, which is something we're pretty sure he historically actually said, because he says that the 12 of you will sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Meanwhile, Judas is currently present. So it's likely he actually said this, because it's not something a later Christian writer would make up. There are Christian interpretations as to why he would have still said 12, of course, but it's an unnatural thing for someone to have made up, so we think he actually said it. He's delegating his judgment. Why is Jesus taking all of these divine prerogatives and giving them to human beings, if he's more than just a human being himself? But of course, he's not just a human being qua his position. He's a very special kind of human being, someone who, according to the non-gospel New Testament sources, is exalted, given the name above every other name. Interesting implication for the divine name-bearing model, by the way. What is the best interpretation, is all I basically have to ask of all of these points. I mean, we got quite caught up in there in the nature of blasphemy and what Jesus could have been claiming. Again, I'll just press the point that if you want to accept that Jesus couldn't have been accused of blasphemy for anything other than claiming to be Yahweh, and yet all he really did was quote Daniel 7, then you have to believe that at the time of Jesus' trial, it was popular enough within Jewish thought to expect that the coming Son of Man, as prophesied in Daniel 7, would be Yahweh himself. I don't see any evidence for that at all. So for these considerations, I think it's a suspicious reading of the New Testament to say that Jesus was claiming identity with Yahweh.
All right. Before we go to the first question, I got one.